So without further ado, I want to introduce our speaker today, Catherine Johns. She coaches entrepreneurs and professionals to get more clients and have more impact, and also make more sales through speaking and networking. And you might remember Catherine from Chicago radio as a news anchor and reporter and talk show host and morning show sidekick at WLS, and then later on at WJMK-FM. And she worked with some of the best talent in the business, and honoring our ability and honing in on our ability to speak and listen in the talk show era. Catherine is also an author of a book called Show Up and Shine, Simple Steps to Boost Your Confidence and Charisma. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Catherine to lead us through today's webinar about speaking with authority.
Fabulous. So the first thing I want to say is, why is it important to speak with authority anyway? What does authority do for you? Sometimes I run into people who are a little bit hinky about the whole notion of authority because they associate it with being bossy or being overbearing or being pushy or something like that. But there's really two ways to think about authority. There is authority over somebody, and you may or may not have that in an org chart. At the very least, you want to be the boss of yourself, right? And you want to sound like the boss of yourself. The other way to think about authority, though, is in the context of being an authority in your subject. So whether that means fundraising or planning events or HR, whatever area you work in, you want to come across as somebody who really knows their stuff. And how you speak has everything to do with that. And part of the reason that how you speak is so important is because somebody brought this up in our pre-talk before we began. We do so much of our work now on the phone or on the web, on platforms like this one, where very often you can't see somebody. And even if you can see somebody, how they sound matters. But when you can't see them and you have only voice and language to go on, then it becomes really important. So we'll be talking about both language and voice, but one thing I wanted to mention is about the sound of the voice. There's a lot of research, and we could go on for days about it, but there's a lot of research about what we conclude based on how somebody sounds. The sound of your voice is more persuasive than your words written, say, on paper. There's some people at the University of Chicago Business School who did a whole project about, they were working with job seekers, but the idea was people read their pitch or heard them say their pitch. The people who heard them wanted to hire them more than the people who just read their words, because people assume things about us based on our voice. So what we're up to today is, what are people going to assume about you based on the way you sound? And we'll start with some words that you probably want to avoid. And that's your cue, Kevin, for my slide with the word cloud. There they are, words to avoid, words not to say. Minimizing words, justifying words, explaining, excessive explaining, all of that stuff is the thing you want to leave out. So you see some of them on the screen there. This idea that people undercut what they're about to say by the way they say it. I'm not really an expert. It's just my opinion. Well, I'm not sure, you might have tried this already. A huge one that people use is only, just, little. So put those in the category of minimizers. I belong to a networking group. I went to recently this networking event. This woman is running the meeting, and out of nowhere, she says to me, "It's so good to see you. I read your little thingy every week." Little thingy? Is she kidding me? That would be my newsletter, which is, by the way, fabulous and full of great content, and I send it out every week on Wednesday morning, and I have it'll be 4 years in September, which is a huge accomplishment. It's big to me. You can tell by the way I talk about it. And she has the nerve to call it a little thingy. I was kind of offended. And I realized that I do the same thing to myself. And if I had a guess, I'd say, you probably do it too. Because it's so common, especially among women. And I'm going to say, especially among men who work in nonprofits, who tend to be really nice people and not the sort of shark you would find on Wall Street, let's say. And nice people often hedge what they're saying in an effort to be accommodating and conciliatory and friendly and not offensive. And when we hedge, when we talk about our work and make it small, we undercut our authority. So there you are. Those are the words you want to skip. I'm going to say one other thing about language, and then this is an opportunity to do some questions. So if you have some, now would be the time to be putting them in the chat box. Sometimes the way to have authority in what you say is say less. Because don't we often run off at the mouth? And sometimes it's because I have a big important point to make and I want to make sure you get it. And so I say it and I kind of repeat it, and then I might say it one more time, and I use a lot of words like very and really because it's so, so important. And the truth is, the more I say about it, the less important it sounds. Ironically enough, we actually reduce our impact when we keep up with the verbiage. So words to live by: say it once, say it well, and zip it. And that's where you have that pause. Somebody mentioned that earlier. Anne was talking about awkward pauses. So the first thing I'd suggest is that you set aside the idea that the pause is awkward. Pauses are actually very comfortable and often welcome. So a pause allows people to understand what you're saying and to take it in, process it, and it gives your words weight. So that moment of silence, it doesn't have to be long, but that moment of silence after you say something is like underlining or putting it in italics. It emphasizes what you say. Evan, you got some questions?
Yeah, so if I'm not sure whether the soft language is a problem for me or not, how would I go and figure that out?
Ask somebody you trust, because people hear you in some ways more clearly than you hear yourself. So if you have a mentor or if you have a colleague that maybe an accountability partner, anybody like that that you work with, ask them and they'll tell you your speech habits. And the other thing you can do is record yourself. So you can actually use the audio recorder on your phone or call yourself and leave a voicemail and then listen to yourself. Often we meander, and when you're leaving a voicemail for somebody, it's a good bet that other person at the other end of the line doesn't have a lot of time to listen and a lot of patience for it. So you want to practice getting crisp and clear about the messages you leave. And leaving one for yourself is a good way to do that.
Okay.
This is me pausing, by the way.
Yeah, yeah, not talking. So isn't there a risk of sounding maybe too harsh if I don't soften what I say?
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes. It is possible to use softening language very strategically because I'm delivering a difficult message or I'm saying something that I know somebody is sensitive about, and I really want to be careful about how it comes across. But that's really different from the sort of reflexive softening that so many of us do, where we kinda, sorta, like, sort of ease into things. And really how that comes across is that we're not sure we really mean what we're saying. So part of this is about understanding your audience and getting clear on, should I soften because it will serve them better? Or do I need to sound like somebody who knows what they're talking about and really means what they're saying? Because that will serve my audience better.
Okay, and I think Matt has a question.
So Matt's muted.
Yeah, I'm trying to unmute him.
Yeah. Matt might have to unmute himself.
Right, or use the chat window.
Well, oh, that was in error. Fabulous.
Okay,
So
no worries.
that's fine, because I'm looking at the clock thinking, sheesh, we've got stuff to do. And pacing is so important, right? When I rush, I can't sound like an authority. If I talk like this, I lose. So I want to talk slowly and distinctly and talk about how you sound. So not so much the words now, but the sound of your voice. Where does your voice come from? And I'm going to tell you that your voice actually starts with your feet. I know that sounds a little wacky, but I want you to start thinking about it that way. The voice, a strong voice, a voice of authority, starts from the floor up or the ground up. And we're going to practice this. I'm going to ask everybody to do it with me, but especially Destiny. So Destiny, I need you to unmute yourself and go with me on this. Are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
All right, perfect. So here's what we're going to do. Your feet are flat on the floor, both of them.
Yep.
Destiny, is that how you typically sit, or are you a cross-legged person, or maybe a crossed ankle person?
I typically will cross my ankles, but I kind of move a lot, so.
So movement is okay. In those moments when you have a message to deliver, you want to get into this spot. So if I'm having a conversation with you, I'm going to move, you're going to move, we'll shift all over the place. But you know how it is when you're saying something that you really want somebody to take in? That's when you want to get into this speaking with authority posture. So the feet are flat on the floor, and you can feel almost pressing into the floor a little bit. So you can feel the muscles in your legs kind of turn on, and your thighs and shins, your whole legs. And then your bottom is squarely in the chair. So both sit bones are balanced on the chair. This is different from, if you watch, this is me sitting on one side. You can practice with that too, Destiny, how if you shift the way you're seated, yeah, and already when I see you like that, you look receptive, approachable, but less authoritative. There's something about the vertical line that gives us that sense of authority. And everybody can everybody see these little thumbnail pictures, Kevin?
Yes, they should
Okay.
be able to.
Perfect. So then y'all can see how Destiny shifted and how I shifted and how different that looks and the perception that that creates. Now, Kathy Bell says she can only see me. So you need to fix it so she can see Destiny as well. All right, so our feet are on the floor. Pressing down, muscles turned on, sit bones squared off, and probably you're not sitting all the way back in your chair. So unless you have very long legs in a very shallow chair, you're sitting a little bit forward just to have your feet flat on the floor. And that's good because if I lean, do I look authoritative? Not as much. And my voice changes when I do this. So we're here, squared away, vertical, and then it's a sense that you're kind of pulled forward from the navel. So this is where we want to really avoid text neck, slumping, and all the things we typically do because we sit at a desk all day and work at a computer. And all of that pulls us in up here. So we want a sense of vertical spine, slightly pulled forward from the navel. So it really is the natural curve of your spine. Sometimes people feel like this is weird. This is the way our bodies were designed. We just don't use them this way all the time. Destiny, does it feel odd to you?
Yes, a little bit. I mean, I feel like my posture's a little bit more, but yeah.
Yeah, so your typical posture is more casual.
Yes.
Yeah, you probably have that in common with most of us. And I'm not saying we have to do this all the time, but those moments when you have a message to deliver, you're sitting around a conference table with your colleagues and what you have to say is really important, and you want them to take it in, it doesn't happen when you're sitting like this. It happens when you're sitting like this. So your shoulders are back and down. You should be able to feel your shoulder blade kind of sliding down your back. Neck is straight, and your head is straight up and down on top of your neck. And for women especially, this is the thing with the head. A lot of us do this. And there's a whole, I've read a whole book about this head thing, that it's like receptivity. It says, go ahead, tell me more. Sometimes that's perfect. But when you need to be the authority, this doesn't get it. You see the difference in me when I do that? Destiny, shift your head around so we can see. Now I don't know if people, yeah. It makes all the difference in the world, doesn't it? It's funny how when you start looking at these things, such small movements can make such a difference. And now that we've got ourselves all adjusted, and I hope you all are playing along on this, the next thing is to breathe. So how do we breathe? We want to breathe from the core. So that means I'm not breathing up here in my chest. I'm breathing so all the way down into the pelvic bowl, right? As if, so what happens is your lungs press down on your diaphragm moves, and you feel that in your core as opposed to just up here. Destiny, are you breathing?
I am.
So tell me how that feels when you breathe really fully and deeply like that.
Feels good.
Does it feel typical for you?
Maybe when I'm working out.
That's a really good way to think about it, because when we work out, we need more air. And so we naturally breathe more deeply without even thinking about it. And when we're nervous or tense, or we're saying something that people might misunderstand, or we don't know exactly where we're going, or whenever, we tend to breathe much more shallowly. And our body senses that and makes us more anxious. So instead of relaxing, we get tenser and tighter and more strangled. And sometimes people just lose their breath altogether and kind of start gasping. That's not going to be any of us, right? So we've got this breathing thing going. And now I'm going to ask you, Destiny, to breathe like that. And as you breathe out, say your name for me and your new job, your new position.
Destiny Nance Evans, Managing Director at Delaware Community.
So let that all come from way down. I know it feels silly, doesn't it? It feels silly to me too. But so here's what happens when we get tense. Our voice comes from up here, and we get that kind of sound like it's strangled off right here. And when we relax and breathe and align ourselves, we have that deeper voice. Here's the reality, and it's a little bit of a trick bag for women, that lower voices are perceived as having more expertise, more authority, more say-so, being more in command. And that's true for both men and women. That is, both men and women perceive lower voices as more credible. Now, as women, our voices are not as low as men, and so we don't have to force it. We're not pretending to be a guy. But we do want to be speaking at the lower end of our natural range more of the time, and then using those higher notes for emphasis. So I hope you heard the difference when I'm talking down here, delivering information. And then when there's something I really want to punch it out, I bring my voice up and then it comes back down. That's the kind of variety that keeps people listening to you, and also that conveys that sense of authority. So everybody should be practicing this with me, unless you're in an office with a bunch of people sitting around and they would think you're really bizarre if you suddenly blurted out your name. But you're by yourself someplace, try that. Notice what happens when you're breathing fully and deeply and you say your name versus when you're tight or tense and then you say it up here. And all of us will sound more authoritative when we have that lower voice. I want to say one other thing about questions. Destiny, thank you for your help. You're a great model.
Thanks.
Questions. if you have some, I'm ready to hear them. And if you don't have some, don't sound like you're asking a question. That's the other thing I wanted to squeeze in about voice. We undermine our authority so often by talking like this when we really want people to believe us and we're not asking a question at all, but our voice has that tone as if it's a question. So if you know that about yourself, or if you get feedback like that about yourself, that's something you really want to work on, so that the inflection at the end of a thought goes down instead of up. When it goes up, we think it's a question, or we think you're unsure or uncertain or not confident. And when it goes down, we hear you as really meaning what you say. So that could be your cue to ask a question if you have some.
So, Catherine, it can be hard to change a habit. So how do you suggest we go about doing that? Because, you know, especially when we're sitting or on these webinars or you're on the phone, we sometimes either slouch or, I mean, do you have to make that conscious effort to put both feet on the ground? And
yeah, I think you do have to make a conscious effort at first. It actually does become natural. The same way I have a habit of tilting my head. I tend to tilt my head this way. Some people tilt this way. Or you have a habit of folding your hands in your lap or crossing your ankles. Whatever your physical quirks are, and we all have them, they got that way because you did them a lot. And so if you practice sitting up straight, being grounded, really letting yourself sort of sink into your space so you're really here and not, you know, up in the air, then with practice, this becomes quite natural too. It also can help to hear yourself recorded or to look at yourself. So there's nothing like a Zoom thing to let me know what I do that I ought not be doing. When I first began doing this kind of work, seeing myself on video was horrifying. I mean, I realized I had these habits, like doing this thing where I touch my nose all the time because I was nervous and uncomfortable and fidgety. And once you see it, then it becomes easier to stop it. I saw somebody put a question about more resources to deal with these things. Was that what that said, Kevin?
yeah, so there's a couple of questions. So someone wants to go back to the question, like I just tried to, right? So, you know, how do we eliminate that habit? I mean, because the other question was, you know, how do you break bad habits? But that one seems to be one that we probably all have experienced in our time.
Yes, and a little bit of filler language is not the end of the world. People who use no filler language sound a little bit robotic, or they sound as if they're reading a script. But it's true that when we say a lot of those ums or uhs or like, you know, all of that filler language, it does undermine authority. Because it sounds like we're padding what we're saying, or we're playing for time and we don't know exactly where we're going. So one way to practice with that is, again, to hear it. So first of all, record something. If you do a webinar like this or have a meeting that's on Zoom, listen back to the recording or call and leave yourself a voicemail. And once you've seen once you've heard what you do, then a good way to practice stopping it is to practice closing your lips after you finish a sentence. I did this with a client once. It was so interesting. She had a habit of jumping in and interrupting people, and me in particular at that moment. And she didn't even know she did it. And she didn't understand why she was having such difficulty with her colleagues, because she interrupted them all the time. And when I said that to her, she was like, I don't do that. So I suggested, try this. Finish what you're saying, close your lips, and don't open them again until I tell you to do it. And people were like this, time from him, because she wanted to jump in and interrupt. When you do the physical sensation, it lets you know what you're doing. So finish your sentence, put a period on it, close your lips, and you'll notice yourself trying to say or actually or basically or whatever your filler language is. And it doesn't take very long once you really bring it to your attention to be able to then begin to stop that.
Great.
I know
Another
we're
one.
short on time, so you
Yeah, well,
tell me.
we can go a couple more minutes, I think.
Okay.
So another one that comes in is often, I often get caught up in watching the person I'm speaking to see if I feel they have heard me. Any tips to help me know when someone has heard?
You know, that's an interesting thing because some people are hard to read. I did a presentation skills program one time for a room full of accountants when I was brand new at this business. And it was terrifying because those guys are very contained and they don't react much. And they sat there like this while I was talking to them. And I thought, oh my God, they hate this. This is horrible. And then by the first break, they were all telling me how great it was. I misread them completely because they are people who are not very expressive, and I'm a person who is quite expressive. So when I judged them by my standards, I misjudged them. So that's one thing, is to really be aware that some people are taking in everything you say and just not feeding back a lot to you. So it's useful not to jump to the conclusion that they're not interested. And then the other thing I would do is if I were concerned about it, I would ask. So they call those tag questions. Does that make sense? Are you with me? Is that clear? Would you like to know more? You say a little bit and then ask a question that invites people to participate, because they will always be more engaging and more interested if they get to participate too. That's part of the reason I've been encouraging you all to ask questions, put something in the chat box, practice along with me, because you could listen to me for 25 minutes and probably learn something, but it'll be a much better experience if you participate along the way. And same thing with people who listen to you. So give them a chance to say something too.
Great. And there was a question or comment about where people can learn about these tips and resources for you.
Conveniently, that's the next slide, right? Ta-da! So catherinejohns.com/39keys will get you 39 keys to command a room and connect with an audience, which will cover a little bit of what we've talked about, and then expand on that with when you're speaking. And it doesn't necessarily mean you're standing on a stage speaking. You're speaking in a meeting. You're speaking to a member. You're speaking to a colleague. How do you make sure that you come across as an authority, but also you're warm enough that people want to listen to you and want to talk to you? So it's always that balance between being in command and connecting with people. When you go to that website and it'll ask you to put in your email address, it will also ask you, would you like to get Catherine's little thingy? I'm kidding. It won't say that. It'll say, would you like to get my weekly newsletter? And please check yes, so then you and I can stay in touch.
Great.